welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing happy, amazing and positive. Today I bring you guys another true crime case. I'm actually still just shocked at how this case plays out. But before I get into this case, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like. It would mean so much to me. As usual, I just wanted to give my disclaimer that all pieces of information that I found in today's video has been found through the internet, through YouTube, through news reports, news articles, things like that. So I do understand that not all pieces of information will be 100% accurate. And also my true crime cases on my channel are to create domestic violence and family violence awareness. Also a trigger warning, this case does involve a lot of information about addiction and gory details. So if this is not your thing, I suggest you click out. I've got a lot more lighthearted content that you could watch. Today's case actually sparked up a conversation. I mean, this conversation has been going on for a while, but it kind of reignited the topic of video game addiction and what it can do to the mind, especially of a young person who hasn't fully been developed yet. This case honestly discusses a lot of those things and how serious these things can become if you allow your kids to be introduced to video games at a young age. I know that video games are quite addictive because I myself have played video games, not so much violent or scary ones, and honestly sometimes you can literally play for hours without realizing how long you've actually been playing for. I don't have an addictive personality, but I can see why people do get addicted to games. It is super it just sucks you in, and sometimes you don't even realize what's going on around you because you're so focused on the game. So this case does talk about, addiction to video games and stuff like that. So without me rambling on any further, let's get into today's case. Today we're going to be talking about a young man called Daniel Petric, who was born on the 24th of August in 1991. Daniel Petric had an older sister, Heidi, who was 21, and a middle sister called Holly, who was 17 years old. Daniel's dad was called Mark Petric, who was 45 at the time of the crime, and Susan Petric, his mother, who was 43. Daniel Petric seemed like such a friendly and loving young man who was super close to his parents, who went out with his parents all the time, had great banter, was really close to them. No one can ever recall any time where Daniel spoke negatively or badly about his parents. Usually, people who are young, they complain about their parents. They just complain about normal teenagery things if their parents haven't allowed them to do something or go somewhere. But no one ever recalls a time where Daniel could do that. And that kind of showed the closeness of his relationship with his parents. Daniel's father, Mark, was a minister in the New Life Assembly of God, a church in Wellington where the family lived. Before the family moved to Wellington, they used to live in Columbus in a 3-bedroom home, which was quite a modest home, and it was kind of like a ranch style home. From the get-go, the family was heavily involved in their church. They would go to church as a family every single week, and Mark and Susan raised their 3 kids with a very strong faith in God. Susan and Mark were youth and associate pastors, where they also worked as house parents for troubled teens in a boys' home. This showed their compassion towards young kids who have been through quite a heavy lifestyle or quite a traumatic lifestyle. They were just so empathetic, and they really just wanted to help the community, help in any way that they could. And they were honestly inspirations to many people. They were known as such a loving couple who would always lend out a helping hand. In 2003, after living in Columbus, their family moved to a 7-acre home in Wellington, Ohio. This is where Mark became a pastor in their new church. Daniel says that it was kind of hard having parents who were so heavily involved in church, especially having a father who was a pastor, because they were kind of expected to be really good kids and not miss misbehave and just be fully involved in the church. They would want to run around with their friends, they would want to play with their friends, they just kind of wanted to be rebellious without having this expectation from such a young age. But overall, he says that he had a really good childhood. His parents cared for them, and he says that him and his sisters had everything taken care of by their parents and everything was provided for them. So he just felt like he couldn't really complain because he came from a really happy home life. Daniel said that there was a little bit of tension that he had with his dad because he was a pastor and, you know, everything was kind of set out in rules, and that he was, you know, the head of the house and everyone had to listen to him. But he wasn't abusive, like he wasn't in an abusive home. The family was loved by the whole church community. Susan loved to help people. She was super sensitive, but she was kind of cheeky. Like she would play little pranks on people. Like she would go to these church meetings and she would take whoopee cushions with her to play pranks on the other people that were there. She also worked in a Wellington nursery home where she was a bookkeeper. She had a lot of compassion for kids. I mean, like I said, her and her husband did work in a boys' home. She was just such a caring person. She also filled in at the church's Sunday school from time to time, and she absolutely loved her life. When the family lived in Columbus, Daniel was homeschooled, but when they moved to Wellington, he went to a regular school with Holly. Holly and him went to the same school. Daniel was kind of like his mum, very kind of adventurous, very fun. You know, would play pranks on his friends as well. He was cheeky. He was kind of rebellious. He would love playing the drums. He would love skateboarding, and he loved to play the Xbox. In school, he was an average student. I mean, he wasn't amazing, but he also wasn't failing every subject. He was just a good student. Daniel also competed in church events where he would actually recite long verses in the Bible, and his coach said that he was really, really good at it. He knew a lot about the Bible. He knew a lot about the Christian religion. He was really good in church and was described as an intelligent young man. Daniel's older sister Heidi was married to a man called Andrew, and together they were youth pastors in their church as well. Daniel was quite an active kid. He loved playing sports, but unfortunately one day he went snowboarding and had a really, really bad accident. And in the accident, he hurt his back really, really bad and was hospitalized and had to take heavy medication for 4 to 5 months. And this would really, really take a toll on Daniel's mental health because he was such an active child. He couldn't really accept the fact that he would just be sitting at home doing nothing until he fully recovered. But that is what kind of happened. He was just laying around at home all day, not doing much, wasn't able to walk around and have fun like he used to. And life really drastically changed for him. And because he wasn't doing much every day, wasn't really going outdoors much like he enjoyed, he fell into depression. Daniel tried to find ways to fill that void and fill in his time by doing something that would keep his mind off of his injury and off of the fact that his life had changed so much. So he resorted to playing really violent and gory video games. But the problem with this was that Daniel wouldn't play for an hour or two. It was more for like hours and hours on end every single day. He became obsessed with the Halo series, and all he would do every day was play that. The parents grew really concerned when they found out the nature of this video game that Daniel was obsessed with. They were worried that it was going to make Daniel really violent in real life, or just desensitized to the idea of like killing and blood and gore and that kind of thing. The parents didn't mind Daniel playing like other games, like sporting games that weren't violent, But just with any violent games, they did not want him playing it. And his dad said that if he was to bring any violent video games in the house, that he would destroy them. But the thing is, Daniel did not listen and kept sneaking them into the house. And his friend would actually give him the video games to play in his house. But his parents didn't know that he was still in his bedroom playing these violent and really gory video games. Before Daniel's accident, his dad and him used to play video games, like sporting ones, things that were quite PG. And even before his accident, he would only play once in a while. But after the accident, this was his outlet, this was his escape. So he just became absolutely obsessed. It was his form of entertainment, and from going from playing maybe once a week to literally most of the day was really, really concerning and quite dangerous as well. One of Daniel's friends told Daniel about the Halo series. He didn't really know much about these kinds of video games until his friend introduced it to him. And after he got obsessed, he would neglect any form of responsibility, and it would absolutely take over his mind. He would say that while he was in class, he would just be thinking about playing the video game, and just a video game in general. Susan and Mark eventually found out that Daniel was still playing these violent video games, and they said that this was becoming too much. At one point, Daniel played for 72 hours straight, and all he did throughout the day was go to the bathroom, and eating was just a bowl of cereal here and there. He would drink soda all day and did not sleep for 72 hours straight. Mark said that he didn't really have that many signs that Daniel was becoming a violent kid or anything like that. The only sort of signs that he saw was that he became very withdrawn and very isolated. And this could be due to the fact that he was constantly playing in his bedroom and didn't really come out to talk to anyone. But other than that, like, his grades did not change. He was still, going to school, that kind of thing. The concern was the fact that he was a fun and loving kid to completely withdrawn and isolated. Sometimes when a young man is a very active and social child and has, suffers an injury and, all of a sudden becomes isolated from the world around him, that can cause depression, especially in young men. A few weeks before the crime, Daniel and his father got into a massive argument about Halo. Mark said that Daniel was not stopping, even though he kept telling him that you are not to play these games anymore. Daniel just did not listen and kept fighting back about it. So Mark kicked him out, and Daniel went to stay with his friend Jonathan. So a little while later, Daniel was allowed to come back home. One night, Daniel snuck out to go and buy the new Halo game that had just come out. He did this by jumping out of his bedroom window and went on his way to go get the new Halo game. He thought that he was in the clear, but as he was coming back in through the window, his mum found him sneaking back in and asked Daniel what on earth he was doing. Daniel had no choice but to confess what he was doing. So he showed the game to his mum and said, I went out to buy this new Halo game. And Susan was like, oh my God, this child. So she goes and wakes up Mark. She tells her husband what had just happened, that he snuck out through his bedroom door to go get the Halo game. And Mark was furious. So he woke up, he got out of bed and went to Daniel's bedroom and said to Daniel, why would you buy this? You know you're not allowed to play these games. And he asked Daniel how much the game was. And Daniel said it was $70. And his father replied saying, even though it cost you $70, you are not to play this game. I am not going to allow it. And confiscated the game off Daniel. And Mark also told Daniel that he was not going to get it back. So Mark took the game off Daniel and took it to a safe that Mark had. And he placed it in the safe where Daniel could not access it. But also in that safe was a 9mm handgun. And because Daniel's game was confiscated, this caused a huge amount of resentment for his parents. On October 20th, 2007, a month after Mark had confiscated the game off Daniel, this day was described to be as a normal day by Mark. He said that there was nothing out of the ordinary, that it was a normal day. Him and his wife were watching TV, laying on the couch. Like, nothing happened that was any bit concerning that day. But little did he know that his son had stolen the key to the safe and went to take out his Halo game from the safe, where also the 9mm gun was. Daniel did not just take out the game, he took out the 9mm handgun as well. Guns weren't really like an out of the ordinary kind of thing. It was just very normal in their household, but it was only used for hunting. It was never really a thing, you know, of violence or anything like that within the home. The family would also do a lot of target shooting as well. It was just a sport for them. Daniel that day felt overwhelming resentment and anger towards his parents. Daniel walks into the living room on the night of 20th October and he tells his parents that he's got something to show them. So when Daniel left the room for a moment, the parents were expecting a really nice surprise.
I glanced over at Sue and I was like, okay, I mean, cool. We thought maybe he was going to be showing us something or apologizing about all the video game tension.
When Daniel re-emerged into the living room, he asked his parents to close their eyes, saying, "Can you please close your eyes for a second? I have a surprise for you." So that's what they did. They closed their eyes. And a second later, there was a huge loud bang. As soon as his parents closed their eyes, Daniel aimed the gun first at his dad.
He came right around here, walked up right behind me and shot me right in the head. And then he turned, took 4 shots at his mom and he hit her 3 times and she died almost instantly.
And then Daniel aims at his mum and shoots 4 times, hitting her in the arms, chest, and head. She died almost instantly.
Do you remember that look on her face?
I do.
Mark, by some miracle, opens his eyes and he says that his head was completely numb, that he was so confused as to what was going on. Daniel notices that his dad's eyes are open and he's awake. So what Daniel does next is hand over the 9mm handgun to his dad, saying, "Here, Dad, here's your gun. Take it."
Tried to hand it to me, I wouldn't take it. He kept trying to give me the gun and I wouldn't. Then there was a knock on the door.
What his intentions were to make it look like it was a murder-suicide. But his plan failed. That night at 9 p.m, his sister Heidi and her husband Andrew were scheduled to come over to watch the baseball game that was on. However, when Daniel committed these crimes, it was 7 p.m. So he thought he had enough time to stage this whole murder-suicide and escape just in time for his sister and his brother-in-law to come and see the scene and to see what had happened. But Heidi and Andrew came over 2 hours earlier than expected. Heidi and Andrew ring the doorbell at 7 p.m, waiting for someone to open for a night of fun and excitement. Daniel inside starts panicking, thinking what the heck, they were supposed to be here at 9 p.m. and it's 7 o'clock. Daniel goes over to the front door and opens it very, very slightly and says, "Hey guys, this is not a good time. Don't come in. Mum and Dad have just had a huge argument. It's not good. It's really, really bad. Don't come in. Don't come in." Heidi and Andrew were really concerned at this point. Daniel never would act like that. Daniel would never just say, "Don't come in." They knew something was really, really wrong and they grew heavily suspicious. And while Daniel was talking to them, Heidi and Andrew hear a couple of groans coming from inside the house. So Heidi and Andrew push their way in, push past Daniel, and discover the gruesome and horrific scene. Heidi and Mark find Susan laying on one couch, completely unresponsive, blood everywhere, and they also find Mark on the other couch, alive but very fatal. So they go over to Susan to check her pulse, and they could not find any pulse. They knew that their dad had made it, but he was not going to make it if he did not receive medical aid. When Heidi and Andrew were checking on the parents, Daniel was saying that they should not have come in. They were arguing, and it's just gotten really, really bad. Mark's jaw was completely shattered when the bullet had hit him. Even though his jaw was shattered, he managed to tell Heidi and Andrew that it was in fact Daniel who had shot them. But right at that moment, Daniel turned it around on Mark, saying that it was Mark who shot Susan, then shot himself. So Andrew starts doing first aid on Mark, while Heidi takes out her phone and calls 911.
My mom is shot and my dad is shot. My brother's here. My brother said, don't come in, don't come in.
As Heidi's on the phone, she notices that Daniel takes back the 9mm gun, and straight away Andrew looks at Daniel and says, hand over the gun right now. And without hesitation, Daniel passes the gun. It's not really known why Daniel did this. Why did he take the gun? Was he planning on doing something to Heidi and Andrew, or planning on doing something to himself? Like, the reason is not really known. So when Daniel gives the gun to Andrew, he walks away a little bit from the scene and takes out his phone and calls a friend. And soon after he hangs up the phone with his friend, Daniel goes outside and takes the family van and flees the scene. So as Daniel's driving, the police were able to catch up to him and make him pull over. And as soon as Daniel pulls over, the police come out and force Daniel out of the family van and arrest him straight away. As the cops are arresting Daniel, Daniel says that his father shot his mom, and he says, why would my dad shoot my mom? Making it seem as if the dad was in fact the murderer.
What's your name? Daniel Petric. Who is that? My dad. He shot my mom and he shot himself. My dad shot my mom! Why would my dad shoot my mom? I don't know, man. Lord, please don't let my dad die. Please don't let my dad die.
The police look inside the family van and they find the Halo 3 game sitting in the front passenger seat. He was driving to his friend's house to play the new Halo game while his mum was at home dead and his father about to lose his life. Police and ambulance show up at the family home, and unfortunately they do pronounce Susan dead right at the scene. And Mark was rushed to hospital where he was going in and out of consciousness. At this point, Mark still had no idea that his wife was dead because he was not able to comprehend things. He was obviously, extremely fatal. The only things that he did kind of manage was to say a couple words at the house and make groaning sounds when Heidi and Andrew were at the door, but that was all that he could manage. Mark had a bullet lodged in his jaw, and the doctor said that the first aid that Andrew did at the home could have potentially been what saved Mark's life. After Mark had received the medical treatment that he needed, he woke up from his induced coma. He was super just out of it, but that is where he was informed that his wife did not make it and that her funeral had already taken place. Mark was obviously so devastated. He hated his son.
I said, God, I hate that kid. I hate him. He's my son, but I hate him. And so I told God, you know what? The next time I see him, I'm going to kill him.
When Daniel was being questioned by investigators, he ran with the story that his dad and mom had a huge fight and that his dad actually killed his wife and then tried to kill himself.
Take me through today, everything that was going on.
I was sitting in my room, and then my dad was just yelling, just screaming at my mom. My dad walked into his bedroom and walked back out, and then I heard a gunshot. I ran out there, and my mom had been shot. He pointed the gun at me, and then he said he was sorry, and then he shot himself.
But the police weren't really buying it. The problem with Daniel's story and his plan was that he didn't think that his dad was going to survive that, but he did. And he's the one that told Heidi that it was Daniel who shot them. So Daniel kind of knew that there was really no way out of this. He was the one that everyone was looking at. And then he has no choice but to confess what he did.
I just kind of snapped and did it. It wasn't something I really thought about.
He also gave the investigators reasons as to why he did it and what had happened, but this was not straight away public knowledge. The public didn't know that Daniel was the one that did this. So, you know, the church community came together and they mourned and they supported each other. And, you know, it was just a really hard thing for the community to accept, you know, what had happened. They were just so shocked. They just couldn't believe it. Everyone was kind of wondering who it could have been, what had happened, who would have wanted to do something like this to the Petric family, because they were so nice, they were so loved by everyone, really. But at that time, there was no suspect that was officially announced. So when Daniel confessed, he kind of didn't really express too much emotion. I mean, he did show a little bit of sorrow. He seemed like he was fully able to accept what he had done, the severity of what he had done. He was calm. He was ready to accept the responsibility and the consequences of his actions. And he was cooperative from then on with the investigators, but he kind of seemed like he was in his own head. He just seemed like he was like thinking a lot, maybe trying to process, you know, what was to come. So Mark, like I said, hated his son, didn't want anything to do with his son. When people would ask him about Daniel, Mark would simply say, I do not want to talk about him. I hate him. And I mean, I can totally understand as to why he felt that way towards his son. But Mark, being a pastor, he thought about it and he said that he, you know, preaches forgiveness and loving everyone. And he said that it would make him super hypocritical if he held all this like resentment and anger towards his son. So he prayed about it and he asked the Lord for help.
When I began to pray for Danny, who I considered my enemy, when I began to pray for my enemy, the love came through, and that's when the forgiveness came through.
Mark was discharged from hospital a couple of months after receiving medical treatment. Even when he was discharged, his jaw was still quite swollen. He had a gash at the side of his scalp because that is where the doctors cut open his scalp to drain all the blood that was forming. There was no brain damage, luckily. And after he was discharged, Mark said that he went to see his son in hospital and told his son that he forgives him and that he loves him. Daniel said that he feels like he did not deserve the forgiveness of his father and that he was not going to forgive himself for what he had done. And his bond was set for $1 million. And although Daniel was only 16 years old, he was actually tried as an adult because of the nature of the crime. At his trial, there was no jury and a single judge would determine Daniel's fate. Daniel spoke to his lawyers and said that the reason that he committed this crime was that, you know, he was 16 now and he didn't want to live by any rules or any controlling from the parents, and that the murder was spur of the moment because when he went to get the game from the safe, he saw the 9mm handgun, and it was then that he decided to do what he did.
Why did you go get the gun to begin with?
I was angry at my dad. He was firm about it, adamant about it, that there would be none of this, and that's the way it was going to be. And so that created a lot of resentment and a lot of anger.
But it was said in court that Daniel was actually planning the murders a week before the murders had taken place, and that he was planning to make it look like it was a murder-suicide and came up with a whole story. And it was also said that he knew that that day Heidi and Andrew were going to come over at 9 p.m. But the problem was that they came at 7 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. earlier than their planned time, their scheduled time. So that kind of disrupted Daniel's plans. It made me wonder if Heidi and Andrew had come over at 9, would Daniel even be a suspect? It kind of would have been, you know, Daniel was at his friend's house and this whole thing happened, and you know, he would have had an alibi. Would the plan have been perfect for Daniel? It's so scary, and it's so amazing to think that they came 2 hours before their scheduled time. Like, not many people come 2 hours early. Mark's life was saved because they did come early. Mark would have probably been dead if they did come at 9 o'clock instead. If Daniel was tried as a juvenile, he would have pled guilty, but then he would have been released when he was 21, so 5 years later. But because he was tried as an adult, he was now facing life in prison if he was convicted. Daniel being a murderer came as a shock to everyone, his friends, his relatives, everyone, because he was never violent, he was never aggressive. If things made him angry, all he would do was just keep to himself and kind of just, you know, isolate for a bit until he calmed down. There was never any ounce of violence that was shown, or any kind of aggressiveness that was shown until that day. It was also revealed later on that Daniel was allowed to go to the viewing of his mother's body for a really short period of time, and he was supervised. But he was not allowed to attend the funeral. This kind of makes me sad because Mark was in a coma. He was not able to get out of hospital to attend the funeral, to say his last goodbye. But, you know, the killer was. That bit just made me so incredibly sad. Like, the fact that he was not able to say goodbye, and the fact that he didn't even know that his wife had died, or, you know, was already buried. It just like breaks my heart to think that that last moment that he had with his wife sitting on the couch watching TV, he didn't even know that that was the last moment that he would have had with his wife. So Daniel was found guilty of aggravated murder and attempted aggravated murder. And when this was read out, he showed absolutely no emotion whatsoever. And as Daniel was being led out of the courtroom, Mark said to his son, "I love you, Daniel." I can understand why his dad would have shown that love, you know, because it's his son. I'm sure a lot of people would be like, no, how did he love his son after what he did? But in my mind, it's kind of like maybe he's just blinded by the fact that it is his son, or he genuinely feels empathy towards his son. And because Mark felt so much love for his son, he pleaded with the judge to give him a more lenient sentence.
I know, without any doubt, he has severe regret, remorse, and guilt. I love you, Danny. I can't count the number of times that he said, "Dad, I miss Mom."
But Daniel received 23 years to life in prison. When the sentence was read out, Daniel kind of just shook his head, and you could see that he was trying to fight back tears. Daniel will be eligible for parole in the year 2031. And he will be 40 years old. So he was 17 when he went in, and he'll be 40 when he's eligible for parole, if he's allowed out. Daniel writes letters to his family. His family go and visit him in jail every week. Everyone in the family has pretty much forgiven him, like his grandparents and sisters. Daniel did apologize for what he did and said that he cries all the time for what he's done, and that he's really glad that his dad is alive. He also says that he finds it really hard to live with the guilt, and whether that's genuine guilt that he feels, or he feels guilty because he got caught, I guess we'll never truly know. His sisters even said that the family will not be able to fully heal until Daniel is back at home, and that is when they can heal together. Now, this was a really intense case. There's so many emotions in this case. Like, it was just a lot to kind of process. Like, I was trying to think about, you know, whether I believe he planned it, or whether he, you know, it was a spur of the moment thing. And I genuinely believe that he could have been planning this, making it seem like a murder-suicide, and coming up with a storyline of, you know, Mark and Susan arguing. You know, it does sound kind of pre-planned, but I mean, he could have also done it on the day and just thought of something really quickly, you know. But, you know, it would be kind of interesting to know what his thought process was at that time.
I'm used to playing these games, and at the end of every round, everything just resets. at the end of every level, everybody's still there.
But you're 16 years old. I mean, you've got to know your parents aren't going to reset after you fire this gun at them. Are you blaming the video game for what you did?
I've always taken responsibility for it. I don't try to deny that. I know it's nobody's fault but my own. Did it play a part? Yes, it did. It was the catalyst behind a mindset that caused a murder.
Did you think that you were just hurting them? Or did you think that you were killing them?
I didn't understand. Like I said, I was a teenager at the time. There's a difference between knowing something and understanding something. And understanding that I was taking a human life.
At 16, you know, you're able to get your driver's license. Like, how can you not comprehend? How can you not understand? But who knows? It is one of those things where it just leaves a massive question mark at the end of it. Anyways, that's all the information I have for you guys today. Like I said before, please don't forget to subscribe and like this video, and please leave some case suggestions down below if you wish to see any specific ones. Please stay happy, please stay amazing, please stay positive, and I will catch you next time. Bye.